You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So, let's be friends. This is our review of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, a race where I was hoping, actually, I was invested in it not failing. I have gotten rid of my schadenfreude of yet another glitzy street track, and I was looking forward with optimism to a race circuit that is probably one of the best, or I might make this argument, I think it's the best street circuit on the calendar. That's not an amazingly high bar, but I think it's demonstrated that it's a venue that they can go racing at. The World Drivers' Championship is decided. Max Verstappen is four-time world champion, and Mercedes were back on the top step. Let me just remind you that we are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind support of our patrons and partners. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. And sometimes we're wrong about being first. At least this is the first podcast I'm doing today, because the Americans haven't got up for the Spotify one yet. We are joined in the shed by a very sleepy, coffee-fueled Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt. 4 a.m. for you.
4 a.m. for me, and all I can say is what happens in Vegas takes forever to get to the podium.
That really, really dragged out. I definitely want to have a rant about that. That was going to be my Missed Apex award, actually, was just the awkwardness of them all sitting in the car. And I can't remember seeing it last year, but as soon as Sainz sat in the car, I went, that's not a very wide car. So then when Russell sits there...
In the middle.
He's in the middle, and you go, well, there's not a lot of room, actually, for Hamilton. I know you've been in that situation. I don't necessarily love being squeezed in like a sardine next to people. And that's when you go, oh, I've been in a car for 2 hours. Like, does my breath smell? Is it? Yeah, well... Is my got stinky pits?
How sweaty were they? I mean, geez, you'd be like,
I mean, I'm sure, obviously they're used to it, but having that smell from racing. But then Hamilton gets in, and I go, well, maybe, I'm the one being silly, and they'll just be completely comfortable. Nope, Hamilton does not. Like, there's no room for his shoulders. So then he's awkwardly sitting forward the entire time, just because he doesn't want to be, sat back there buddy-buddy.
Yeah, and he rolls down the window, and he's, like, looking out at this. It was just... Yeah, frankly, I said this 2 other places, but it would have been a lot more fun if he'd gotten in the front seat and done some ridiculous driving. I would have enjoyed that. Yeah,
the whole psychology of that looking out of the window stuff was just to avoid leaning back and having all 3 of them squished in. We're joined by an Australian at rarely a social hour for him. Hello, Jono. Jonathan Simon.
Perfect hour, and boohoo to you guys for having to wake up early and stay up late. But I must say, the whole point of the Singapore Grand Prix was to have a night race spectacle. What we had at Las Vegas, I think the Singapore Grand Prix is now redundant, and we have enough night street races, and Vegas is going to begin to take over.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, I will admit I was negative about it going in, but after 2 seasons of it, you go, well, they've obviously put some thought into the layout. They seem to be responsive to what the drivers want on track, or if there's anything that needs changing. And drain cover aside, I don't think we really had too much to complain about. So, if all street circuits were like this and could have racing like this, I would lose most of my objection to street circuits. I'm not like, it's not a religion of mine that I'm anti street circuit.
And I think also that but as you mentioned earlier, it's the layout, I think, that sells Vegas over the line, because the gimmicks, off the track and all that, we don't really care too much. But it was we've had 2 great races here out of 2. Now, not putting it away from Singapore, 2008 was wacky, to say the least, and some people got banned for life and some other stuff. And, there's been some dull races over there too. But I think now, when that race came in, this is what that spectacle was trying to achieve. With Vegas coming in, like I said earlier, there's no point having this race anymore. The best part about it is, and as you mentioned before, is we get interesting stuff like a sweaty Lewis Hamilton trying not to get sitting next to sweaty George Russell in the car after the race. Like, this is the stuff I actually kind of enjoy it.
No, I will continue to slate that bit because it took forever. It took so long for it all to unfold just so that they could have it on the strip. So that was all a bit convoluted, but fine. We're dribbling around the edges here because I would rather have a race that was interesting, they can overtake, and key in this era is to have something going on with the tyres. So we are going to talk about the battle up front with the Mercedes and Russell's win. The Ferrari team interactions and shenanigans and stuff, I think, is probably the most interesting topic today. Then after that, the next thing after that is got to be acknowledging the championship being decided here. But we're going to try not to make it too much of a season review of the championship. Maybe we'll do that at a separate show midweek. I think that's probably the right place for that. And then there's loads of stuff like the race to the bottom between Perez and Colapinto, Tsunoda versus Lawson as well. But I'm going to start, and I normally want to start with like the big topic, but today, Matt, I think I actually do have to start with the tyres and asking you about the tyres, because it seems like it's a low grip track, yet they were struggling with tyre life or tyre graining, and all of that results in having to make interesting choices around the pit stop and making something happen. If this was a sticky one-stop race, maybe it's less, a bit more vulnerable to being dull, but I think this has got all the ingredients for banger racing. Now, last year, it just so happened you had the circumstances for that overtake and battle for the lead and stuff like that. This race didn't have that, but all the ingredients were there for decent racing.
Yeah, well, what I really liked about this is it was very challenging and an incredibly put a lot of stress on the driver's ability to manage the tire and manage it, especially because all of the tires did grain. There was no tire that was going to be free of that entirely. So a lot of the result that happened came down to both the team and the driver's ability to keep the tire from graining. Now, you don't know what graining is. Take a pencil, take an eraser, and rub it back and forth. Those little rolly bits essentially is graining on a Formula One tire. And as you might imagine, once you get that, you start to lose lap time very rapidly. And there's many different ways you can cause a tire to do that. For example, overtaking your teammate and pushing really hard on full fuel at the start of the race. That can make that happen for sure. And Mercedes, of all of the teams, had it absolutely dialed in. Ruth Buscom after the race said that their degradation, their loss of pace was like 0.16 a lap. Ferrari's was like 0.6 on the medium tire. And that's really where the race was made. It was made on the medium tire in the beginning with Russell. And it was also made with McLaren and Norris, but in the opposite direction. And that's what let Verstappen get away from him. And that was the end of that.
And adding on to that, a very, very good, I want to say revelation this year is that this Mercedes is very quick in cold conditions. And I know the drivers and Toto Wolff and Hamilton, Russell, they've all been saying, we don't know why our car's quick this weekend. The team, and they say the team says we don't know either. But there's been that correlation that at Austria, where they won, Silverstone, Spa-Francorchamps was the other, and of course today at Vegas, they were all cold conditions races. Now, that's not to say that every cold race this year they have taken the victory, but it has added to the fact that the tires have worked for this Mercedes team and this car in these cold conditions.
Yeah, and so, right, is that why? Because I had a different reason. So I was saying to Meg, and I think on our Patreon pod as well, we predicted a Mercedes possible victory here based on exactly the same thing, Silverstone, Spa, and that performance coming in. So I wondered whether it was down to the power unit a little bit. So because when it's colder, it's more efficient, and I think maybe they're slightly outside the most comfortable temperature window, as very good engineers are prone to do. I saw this a lot in the defense industry. The temperature stuff and the thermal stuff was always seen as, well, you can always fix that. Let's make it work real good. And then we'll worry about, and so many of these projects end up overheating initially, and then they bolt the cooling solutions in. And I always wondered if there's something like that in Mercedes, where when it's cold, they suddenly have a bit more power to play with, so they can add a bit more wing for the same effect. But Russell seemed to be putting it down more to ride height affecting what they can do in that window. But what's your theory, Matt? Because I know we're talking about tyres here, but we'll roll into Mercedes. What did make Mercedes so good?
Well, I think taking the broad view that if you're speculating, tires is always probably the right answer. I think what you're looking at is across the season, Mercedes has had a platform that's been incredibly unpredictable. And I think at this track, their ability to get the tire and keep the tire in its correct performance window made up for that instability that, like, for example, at Moto, we saw with both cars with having the big rear snaps. It's just been unpredictable for them. And this really goes back to the fact that their wind tunnel isn't really suitable for this generation of aerodynamic regulations. Aston shares it, and they are doing equally unpredictable things with their cars. So I would start with saying that the tires worked out for them way better than for anybody else on the grid. Now, you bring up an interesting point about the air being colder. It's denser. Maybe that gives them a turbocharger advantage. I just quickly checked the altitude of Vegas. It's 600 to 800 meters. So it's ish there with Brazil. So, there could be something in that. There could be something in that as well.
I don't really know geography. Yeah. Is that particularly high or such super low? Like which way?
It's high-ish.
Oh, okay.
It's on the high
Mexico.
side.
We're not Mexico, but
not Mexico, but it's on the high side. Yeah. But it's also much colder. So maybe that puts their power unit back into a place where it has full power. And the other thing obvious, Mercedes often struggles with power unit cooling. Probably not so much an issue here. So maybe that's another thing that allowed the Mercedes team in particular to access that.
That's what I said. That was the thing I said. And then if you see, when they had the power advantage in like 2014, 2015, that they were really able to bolt on downforce that other teams weren't able to do. So I don't know if there's like a mini version of that. They suddenly go, we can... I bet you they look at the top speeds when they're putting a little bit of wing on or whatever, and once the top speeds start to be overly compromised, then you have to start taking wing off. But if you've got a bit more power, you can start piling it on. What I would say, Jono, is it must be so frustrating for Mercedes that sometimes they can do that. So in an ordinary season, a team that could do that this weekend would be a championship winning team.
And looking forward, can they do it in these final two races at both Qatar? Then you've got Abu Dhabi. Notoriously, the Middle East is supposed to be extremely hot. It's forecast to be about 25, 30 degrees Celsius. What is that in Fahrenheit? I'm going to guess 80 to 90 for our US fans.
No one cares.
Nobody cares. So we go, but the one thing I should mention is that both races, you've got one in the night, one in the twilight, or is it both in twilight? Anyway, they're both going to be end in the night. So it's going to be a little bit cooler than usual. So that's going to be pretty interesting now, is whether Mercedes can continue this form into the next couple of races, or whether or not we've just seen George Russell and Lewis Hamilton's last chance to win in a Mercedes, especially for Hamilton, who's leaving the team, as we know. This could have been a great send-off for him in his third last race.
I don't think it's going to happen. I think the dynamic in that team at the moment is, George Russell has got the edge for whatever reason. We can completely discuss why, but Hamilton is just unable to do it on a Saturday for whatever reason. But let's start with George Russell, because he nailed pole position, and then I think this will be an underrated race win. So I'm going to go off. I'm going to go off on this one. So I've heard the comments already of like, you just disappeared into the distance, was the question he was sort of posed by the interviewer. But there was an awful lot for Russell to do in that race. So firstly, it's not nothing to go, right, I've got to disappear and I've got to build a gap, get out of DRS. And with George Russell's previous on tyres, immediately the panic sets in to go, he's doing it again, isn't he? He's doing a classic George Russell. He's using up all his tyres. And then as Leclerc starts to eat into him, you go, yep, there you go. Same thing again. Same thing over and over again. And then that realization then, okay, he's got to fight. But I thought it was over at that point for Russell. But actually, no, he's probably gone into a bit of tyre management that Leclerc didn't. So, flip that on its head for a little while, disappears off. But then the real key battle at the end was Lewis Hamilton was the faster race package. I'm convinced of it. Hamilton came back from like 20 seconds and had to make up 9 places. And Russell knew that. So there's no shame in that. There's no disgrace. He nailed it on Saturday by a long way, did a lot better. but you have to manage the gap. And if you look at what he did, he managed it all the way down from about, I think, 15 seconds at the final stops, managed it all the way down, and then you could see the gap slowing and slowing. His pace was around 37s to start with, and you go, Hamilton's taking a second out of him. This is a disaster for Russell, but it was all carefully managed. And as soon as the gap got to about 7 or 8 seconds, Russell increases it, and now it's only half a second per lap. And you could see on the timing screens, by the time it got to 5 seconds, Russell managed it to go, right, now I want to keep the gap there. I think that was an absolutely aces drive from George Russell. I know I've gone off on one a bit there, Jono, but I wanted to make sure that this race win wasn't underrated.
No, you're fine. And you know what? Credit to George, because at the start, had Leclerc passed him, and then George, which we think probably would have repassed him, I think is what would have happened. We think the tyres for the Ferrari, we'll talk about their pace a little later on. Matt's got some good insight as to why they've just slowed down out of nowhere. Anyway, he would have lost a couple of seconds there in that fight. Then you have him nailing the weekend. Like, it's not about just nailing a Sunday. I know the Sunday is the most important day, but it's not always the only day you need to nail. So he's qualified well, hasn't butchered his Q3 lap, started on pole and won the race. Where it's become a bit concerning is that if Hamilton switched on, he only has to deal with this for 2 more races, thankfully, before a 12-year-old comes into the car next year, Kimi Antonelli. And he basically, what was the gap? You said 15 seconds or something like that. Hamilton's
12,
tires, and Hamilton's tires, Matt, were 10 laps older too. So he's clawed the gap back, had the race pace, and he's done it on hards that have been so old. I know it's the hardest compound, but surely, Matt, you can't expect somebody to do something like that on any Grand Prix.
Yeah, well, I mean, keep in mind the hards here were the C3s, the dead middle of the tire range Pirelli puts out. So hard in a relative sense. But I mean, I tend to agree with Spanners here. I think on absolute pace in the race, if Hamilton hadn't had that deficit, I think he was faster than Russell. But Russell didn't have to be faster than Hamilton in that way, because he, in a very Carlos Sainz kind of way, thought his way through the whole race, never was under any pressure whatsoever, and was just, I mean, he was really pretty faultless as far as I could tell.
Well, he wasn't under pressure because he managed it so well. Now, we've seen extreme versions of this where we go for if there was just 5 more laps, he would have caught him. And the go-to example this season has been Lando Norris hunting down Verstappen in Barcelona. And there, the gap was a little bit closer. There was less time to make up. So everything shrunk down. So he had to manage that to like 1.5 seconds or something. And, you get this feeling of, if there was just 5 more laps. But the driver ahead is managing it great. So Verstappen is excellent at doing that. I would say he's the best we've seen on the grid at doing that. And in Barcelona, a much smaller margin. Russell had a bit more breathing space here, but also the delta, I think, to the performance to Hamilton was a lot bigger as well. Hamilton, in the interviews afterwards with Terry Crews, who I love, was so close to saying, I definitely would have won. So he said, I really had the pace. The pace was great. The car was fantastic. And if I hadn't messed up in Q3, I definitely, I'd have breezed the day because it would have been quite rude to go, well, I would have won.
But you notice, Spanners, is he paused. He said, had I have done that, I would have. He wanted to say, I would have won by 17,000 laps, but he couldn't say it. So he said, I would have breezed it,
That's the experience talking.
But the thankful part is, and I was talking to Brad Philpott, Alex Van Gino, all us Hamilton fanboys. Now, we were all talking on the Saturday and the Sunday.
Huge argument,
we were like, we were thinking, my God, we really hope we are not supporting the next Sergio Perez right here. No offense to Sergio Perez. But
how is that no offense? How is that no offense?
Catching strays even at 4:30 in the morning.
After today, Hamilton's performance, I sort of said, well, Sergio wouldn't have done that against a George Russell caliber talent. So maybe Hamilton isn't quite off or declining as fast as we think. And not to go into Lewis's troubles too much, because we went into it in Brazil, went into it last week on the news show and all that. But I certainly think this car is not his best car he's ever driven. He's struggling in it. So I think Hamilton at his best in this car has Russell. But he's not consistent enough, and that's why George was the best this weekend.
Okay, so the argument was quite long, and so apologies to the rest of the WhatsApp chat, but I learned so much arguing with Brad. I don't know how much you caught of it. We were both having fun playing with the lap times app. So is it f1tempo.com? I think
F1 Tempo, the telemetry app.
I think it might be f1-tempo.com, the telemetry app. And so I've only recently discovered this. And by the way, reading telemetry, it's not that easy. But we're having a go. The fact that you can look at it and look at the inputs is amazing. So from a sporting point of view, I find it incredible. So we dug into it. I drew one set of conclusions out of it, thinking that turn that Hamilton had his little off in Q3 was flat out and the back end had stepped out. But we're able to really dive down into that telemetry, compare it to the video, and see that actually it happened as he was doing the normal lift off. So they can't take that corner flat out. And so and Brad did this great analysis of it, where basically on the video you can see his hands move slightly to the left to try and manage a bit of oversteer, like the back is stepping out. And then you can see in the telemetry then he has a bigger than normal lift and gets back on the power, and that's when the big snap comes. So you go, okay, we can put that down to driver error, or you can put it down to he was expecting to be able to do this with a car. He was expecting to be able to put that amount of steering lock and that amount of throttle on for this final Q3 run, because he'd been top in Q2. He'd been great in practice. He had confidence in this car all the way through the weekend, except to Q3 when it all went wrong. And then you get back to the race pace, and again, he's blisteringly fast, and the fastest driver car combination on the grid. It keeps happening in the latter stages of qualifying, and it's hard not to go, it's just a bit weird, especially when he specifically talks about pressures and temperatures. It's hard not to say, at the very least, they're getting something wrong at the end of qualifying. He doesn't suddenly only become a bad driver consistently only in Q3. And, there ends my rant. Extrapolate whatever conspiracy you want out of that. Or is he just washed?
Over the last 15 years, one of my iconic Hamilton moments I can remember, and now as a fan of Hamilton, I go, yeah, he's won a lot of races, he's great, it's been awesome to support him. One of my bad memories has been watching Q3, the replay pops up with the F1 logo, and Hamilton is locked up or he's done a mistake in Q3 when it matters most. It's just, I wish there was a stat out there. There's been some ridiculous stats posted this weekend. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who's noticed that on F1 Twitter, but anyway. So there's been that. I want to see the Hamilton Q3 mistakes stat compared to other drivers on the grid. I feel like it happens too often for somebody who's such a great qualifier, has to be said, over the course of his career.
Oh, okay. Everyone knows I'm a big Hamilton fan, but one of the things that's always frustrated me is he never seems to put in a banker lap. Now, Matt can back me up on this with the way the tyres work in qualifying. But all through, like in the olden days, or even pre-Pirelli, I always got that feeling like he didn't do the safety banker lap, which used to be much more of a thing. And so he's pushing twice, and then the chances that if you're at 99%, the chances of making that error are much higher. But like he's always going for that sweet, perfect lap. And then, especially I think against Bottas, you saw Bottas deploying the banker lap well. Tell me if I'm misremembering any of this. But now the banker lap is kind of useless anyway, because they only have one set of new tyres in Q3, which just frustrates the hell out of me. I don't see the point in any of that. But I think I was saying, Matt, that is the criticism I've had of Hamilton, is that he doesn't seem to tactic his way out. It's a low percentage tactic, the way he approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could accuse him of that here, because we were all focused on his second lap, because that was his last chance. But this whole scenario was really kicked into gear into, I think it was turn 12, where's that tiny little bump. And I noticed it, even back in practice, someone locked up, and it was the outside tire that was locked up. And I thought, oh, that's kind of odd, because it was a right-hand side front tire locked, and you're making a left-hand turn. That's not what you usually see. A lot of drivers fell foul of that. Across the weekend. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things, like whatever that was, he hit it wrong. I don't think he was trying to overdrive the car or push.
Just a couple of comments from the Patreon live chat. Hello, our Patreon Discord. You can join them live during the show by going to patreon.com/Missed Apex. We also did a Friday show as well, which was, I mean, it's worse content, but people seem to appreciate us putting it on there, and we have fun there, being loosey-goosey as well. But Maria says it's not either sabotage or being washed. I agree. It could be getting something wrong, and if that issue disappears when he goes to Ferrari, then we'll have another data point. If he goes to Ferrari and he suddenly doesn't keep losing his ability to drive a car well in specifically Q3, then we can go back and revisit this. But Wilhelmus says, I think Lewis isn't as consistent as he used to be. Don't know if that's age or his head not being fully in it at times, which I can understand. And that's also a possibility as well. He's in a lame duck period. He's not included in like the team meetings and stuff, which will make it hard to set up. And you were saying Summers told you that Hamilton and Russell were driving very different setups this weekend.
They're driving the same car, because remember there's that thing after the crash in Coda where Russell was on the old spec. And I want to say as of Brazil, I've been told they were both on the same spec, but he said that he thinks they drive very different setups, meaning like suspension setups and this and that and the other, because they have different driving styles, different sensations they need from the car to maximize it. But really, it's a driver-car interface. And I think inherently there is a weakness. This is just my personal vibe. There's inherently a weakness to this car that Lewis tends to expose more than George does, just through the way he drives. And the only time you really see it is when the car is on the absolute limit, and when's the only time you ever see the car driven as fast as it can actually go? Oh yeah, right, Q3. So I think of the two drivers, Lewis is more likely to have a problem with the car just because of an inherent design weakness. Some of it, maybe it's reflexes. Maybe George can still catch some things that get by Lewis because he is in his late 30s. And, those reflexes do not stay the same no matter how hard you train them. But I think you're correct. Ferrari will be the decider here. If he goes to Ferrari and we see the same pattern of things, then we're talking about something different.
Yeah. I'm not ideologically opposed to the idea that some natural aging might occur. Just a quick apology to the live YouTube viewers. We don't normally run ads live. We try to keep them minimum for the post, but I don't know why. They're sort of popping off every 10 minutes or so, but apparently they're quite short anyway. And hey, look, Matt needs more trumpets. I need more cowboy hats. So I think, not too much more to say on the Mercedes situation. I think we've covered that pretty well. So let's go on to the slightly messier Tifosi team, to the Ferrari team, which amused me throughout. What on earth was going on with Ferrari today? I think the one point I would go to first is the radio quote from Sainz when they said what happened there? Why did you make me come out of the pits? And they said we weren't ready for you. And Carlos Sainz, absolutely not shy, wake up, just yelling at his team to wake up. Then there was these miscommunications or not very firm instructions to Carlos Sainz, and the post-race rant from Charles Leclerc is absolutely gold. I will definitely read some redacted bits of
very redacted.
But Jono, what's the vibe at Ferrari? That was a weird day.
Very weird day. Very weird going into next year. We segued from Lewis Hamilton and Leclerc. Does Leclerc expect to act like a team player next year? Why? There's two drivers who could possibly be going for a world championship. That's a topic for the future. But where we begin is there's many stuff to talk about here. Let's go to the radio message from Leclerc where he's basically, this is after the second stop. So your final pit stops of the day. It's about 20 laps left. Sainz is behind Leclerc, and they basically said, Carlos, we've told Carlos not to put you under pressure. So just take care of your tires, Charles.
Easy breezy,
it's all good.
No problems.
And he's right up his rear gearbox, and he says, maybe try in Spanish, because I don't think he's understanding. And then obviously sails past him, and then that's Leclerc's gone, well, what's going on over here? Which then leads over Spanish to that final radio message at the end of the race, which I'll get into a little, after you read it, I'll get into some more insight on that about what Leclerc then spoke about over that radio message.
Oh, okay. So it's down to me, is it? Coward. Okay.
Well, I've read too much of the first one. People need to hear your voice for the second one.
We'll do turnips. We'll do turnips. Charles said,
turnips.
Yeah, I did my job, but being nice turnips me over all the turniping time. All the turniping time. It's not even being nice. It's just being respectful. I know. I need to shut up. But at one point, it's always the same. And then Vasseur jumps on the radio like, Charles, stop. And then, but he carries on this rant. And the final thing is that there's a little gap, and then the engineers remind him to do pickup. Yeah, so they do pick up rubber so that you're not underweight. And he just like goes, yeah, you can pick up whatever you want. And he goes, oh, the radio's on. So he said, he must have just, I mean, that has happened to me on Discord and iRacing where I've just, I've still got my finger somehow on the transmit. But yeah, Jono, it's emotional. Go on, Jono then, Matt.
After the race, he said, I said turnip this, turnip that, whatever. But he said he doesn't want to divulge into what they were talking about. So now we speculate over what they were talking about. And I think basically the writing's on the wall here is that it's probably something to do with team orders, him and Charles working together for a good race, because they're in contention at the moment for this Constructors' Championship. They could win this. They're only about, is it 24 points behind?
24 points.
So that could change at Qatar. They could change at Abu Dhabi. It's very close between the two. Very important constructors race for prize money. Not that it really matters for Ferrari, who used to spend triple the budget cap before the budget cap era came in. So I don't know what that would mean. If anything, I think all these top teams, maybe except McLaren, would want a tank for more wind tunnel time, which is what Red Bull did, even though they deny it. So Allegedly, sorry. So anyway, back to the team orders thing is that I think that there's going to be some form of there's going to be beef. There's going to be implosion next year at Ferrari if this continues, because if Leclerc is upset about situations like this, and him and Hamilton, which looks like they'll go wheel to wheel, they look very similar in terms of talent. Let's see next year in the same car. There's going to be more of this in the future.
Yeah, it is a bit too number onesy, isn't it, at Ferrari next year? Unless one of them, unless we're going to be surprised by the form. But that's a next year problem. But yeah, Matt.
Yeah. It's and this is the thing. Like, Leclerc got the jump, and so he got the pit strategy calls. But I think Ferrari really just got the whole game wrong. They were still looking at, can we make a one-stop work, long after all the other teams were like, oh no, this is definitely a two-stop. We need to just change our expectations, because you could see both drivers having these conversations with their engineers. And, you can yell about signs and team orders, but man, did you see him letting Leclerc by, but not Hamilton? That was a magical thing to do, and not an easy thing to pull off at all. And then when he gets to the pits, they're like, they don't have they're like, oh, go back out. Sorry, we forgot to put people in the box. Not the only person that even happened to this race. So I don't know. There must be something in the water, maybe in Vegas. Mechanics have been hanging out on the stripped sidewalk a little too long. I don't know. But it was remarkable, because if you look at Sainz radio, he's like, okay, I'm working very hard to use less steering angle in the slow turns, trying to preserve my tires. But he caught Leclerc. He just flat out caught him. He was better on the tires. He was better in the first stint on the tires. He was better in the second stint on the tires. What do you do at a certain point?
Which is interesting, because when you're Ferrari at the moment, do you sit in your office and go, we have Hamilton and Leclerc. Should we not have signed Sainz and George Russell at this stage? It looks like that should have been the duo you go with. But anyway, we'll let the future and fate decide.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do that thing where Sainz has one race over 1 in 4 races, and everyone goes, see.
No. And you are right, Spanners, because I have contradicted for 3 years on this podcast, I have advocated for stop looking at stats and points. Leclerc has been a better driver. I'll stick to my guns on that one. Right. Now, with the pit entry dilemma, which you spoke about, this was during the race where obviously they've either tried to do the opposite to Hamilton, or I haven't actually looked through I've looked through every radio transcript accept this one, is when they've asked Sainz to box, they've obviously told him at the last minute, don't box. So he's entered the pit entry blend line, then dangerously rejoined the racing circuit. And there's been arguments.
Yeah, how's that not a penalty? How is
exactly? And where this is a bit fishy is there was a reprimand for Lewis Hamilton in Germany 2018. Remember the good old in that one?
Yeah.
With Bono. So there was that one.
Their
but
finest
there's been
hour.
penalties for Alonso in the past for doing this. There's been penalties. I'm pretty sure Lewis actually got one this year for a similar incident. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it could be another driver. But I looked into this. Now, in the calendar this year's 24 circuits, there are 2, Montreal and Austria, which I think you genuinely have to drive over the pit entry blend line to drive safely around the track without compromising a pit entry. The other 22 circuits, you don't need to worry about this. So stick a bollard and say to everybody, this is the defining point, and have the same rule for every race. Don't change it based on race direction notes. Now confuse us fans who say that should have been a penalty. It wasn't even investigated.
That is weird to me, considering how much it's sort of on the racing line. So you're popping back out onto an apex on that. So when Sainz popped that, that seems dangerous. I know he'll probably argue, well, I knew there was no one around me or whatever. But you did have Leclerc and Hamilton there. So instinctively, you think if you go into the pit line and then you go over it, that's a penalty. Given that it wasn't investigated, is either for one of 2 reasons. Either there's a circuit-specific thing that says you're allowed to do it, because on the commentary I watched, they were saying, well, there's a force majeure clause, which he definitely...
There is.
Yeah, but you can't claim that for that. That nothing extreme happened. He didn't have to jump out of someone's way. Or it could be because they installed a brand new race director with 3 races to go, and he does things a slightly different way. And in his mind, like, well, I've always said it's fine to change your mind and cross the pit line. But I disagree slightly with Jono's just have the same thing for every race. I've got no problem with there being race-specific rules. I think it could be communicated a little bit better. And I think at one point, me and Meg were talking about, right, we'll vow this year that every race, we're going to look at the race director's notes so that we're on top of these specific things. I haven't done it at one single time. I haven't done it.
But there's a problem with not just Formula One, but many sports. In a quick one is that there's too many rules. There's too much gray area. So why now add a rule? Which, number one, fans, like, who cares how you enter the pits? Like, why does that matter? Just have the same rule for every racetrack, and then maybe 1 or 2 tracks it changes. Don't change it every 24 tracks. That's my opinion, Matt.
Sorry, I've got to jump in, Matt. So Will's just said the new race director seemed to have done okay as a whole. So I was trying to be clear there that I wasn't slating the race director or saying he did anything.
Send mail to Matt at
Yeah. Or I was clear beforehand that the problem wouldn't necessarily be that a new race director would be bad. It's just that he might do things in a different way. And there's loads of things that aren't specifically prescribed in the rules. So it kind of comes down to the individual. So if he's just been doing this kind of thing in F2 or that kind of thing for a while, and he comes into F1 and just does it his way, which might well be fine, it's just different and confusing. So can I clarify that is what I meant? I wasn't attacking whoever the new person is. Give him some time to bed in, or until he does a decision that goes against Yuki, Hamilton, or Perez.
Rui Marks, and actually George Russell likes him a lot because he now feels listened to. So that's good, I suppose. The rule actually exists in the International Sporting Code Appendix L, entering the pit lane. And it does pretty much specifically say you're not supposed to do that for the reason you cite. It is dangerous. There is absolutely a force majeure clause. And it's going to be one of those tough arguments. There was nothing in the car. But when your team yells at you to stay out and you're in that position,
that's what
as a driver, you were particularly vulnerable. I wouldn't be surprised to see a fine for Ferrari wind up happening as a result of this. And just to get to the dangerous argument, Leclerc was ahead. Hamilton was behind him in the pit lane. So he knew he had a gap to exit into that wasn't going to be occupied by another car. That would be the argument I'd make as a Ferrari lawyer.
That's very true, Matt, because obviously you could say that he has made a decision to rejoin the track safely because there's nobody around him. That's true. But obviously with his thought process, there is no way in race conditions, had there been 15 cars at that point of the racetrack, toe to toe, or whether there was zero, he would have done the exact same thing. So I say that's down to luck, not to degrade from Carlos Sainz's skill. But the whole point of this pit entry blend line is obviously, as fans know in the sport, it's to detract people from diving in too late. But there's no, like, the rule to me now, I'm now confused as a fan. What's the rule for now in not diving in, but for changing your mind late? There needs to be a definitive rule at every racetrack that's similar,
point of no
unless
return.
the racetrack is so tight or you just can't drive around it that you just can't enter safely or an exit and do all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I like there being a point of no return. So I think that exhausts how interested I am in the pit lane rules. I mean, EJ's just posted it there, Matt. We can say it's a Sporting Code Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 4, brackets D.
Yeah, no, I went and read it. There's more to it than is being written in there, because there's a whole. Okay. It's really about refueling.
Okay,
anyway,
well, this states that except in the case of force majeure, any part of the car of a tire of a car entering the pit lane must not cross in any direction any painted line on the track for the purposes of separating cars entering the pit lane and those on track. So this to me feels very clearly like it should have been a penalty.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if you read the whole thing, it's mostly about people entering the pit lane late, not them leaving the pit lane. That's the whole first paragraph is really about that. So context.
You know what? I'm going to dig into the rules later on, and I'm sure it will be just as rewarding as the do you have to stay on track rules, or the how do you decide the grid if you're not able to do qualifying debate that we had. Because it's going to be thrilling. I can't wait. We'll do a special midweek drop just on that alone. The thing I want to end with on Ferrari, though, is Carlos Sainz is angry. He's just angry in general. And he's been making some real comments in the press. You know, this first one of, oh, well, I helped make the car brilliant and I definitely would have won the title with it next year, but now I don't get a shot. And then let's say, you know, the cander's nice and refreshing and honest. He's saying, you know, it hurts that the top teams didn't want him. But, you know, I would have saved that till maybe your book and not with Williams just sat there in the sidelines going, that's all right, Carlos. We're just glad that we were the next choice after teams you actually wanted to go to. And so he's taken all of that attitude to these final races. And there's not going to be telling him anything. There's no telling Carlos Sainz, hold station, do anything like that. This is going to be, these last three races are just going to be all out war. And Paul Leclerc wasn't ready for that today. Where are we going next, Matt? Oh, there was a championship decided today, Matt.
Yes, there was.
Okay. Should we talk about it? Or?
Yeah, oh no, I thought you were going to go. I thought it was like a bumper or something going to happen.
No.
So
oh, okay. Well, let's do that. Let's
smooth.
It was. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now it's a world championship.
4 times world champion Max Verstappen. Whatever you think about decisions or cost caps or anything like that, he has brought it home from a competitor side. He has brought the title home 4 times. And as certain other drivers on the grid are finding out, it isn't just as simple as having the right car at the right time. In 2021, he absolutely showed, whatever you think of the final result, he showed that in a tight championship battle, he would do what it takes. He would race well. He would be competitive and fast and not really bottle it. Not bottle it in the sense of like making a mistake flying off track with the championship on the line. He matched his competitor. 2022-23, yeah, a little bit more of a gift. But in 2024, he has had not the best car for huge swathes of this season. And he's found himself up against a competitor who keeps saying things out loud. Lando Norris keeps saying things like, oh, I wasn't ready. Like he was in the back garden and someone's bowled the ball into the stumps and he was there, you know, with his cricket bat over his shoulder. Oh, I wasn't ready. It doesn't count. That's not how sport works. You have to be ready. You can't say I wasn't ready as any kind of validation. Don't even if you weren't ready, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone that you didn't win a world championship because you weren't ready. That's just unreal. But Max Verstappen was ready. Max Verstappen was ready from the second he got in an F1 car. Yeah, he might have been a bit more crashy, but if you give him an opportunity 3 years earlier, or at the same point in his career that Lando Norris was at, Max Verstappen would have been ready. And that's why he's entering the annals of F1 as one of the all-time greats. And we don't know if Norris is going to get another chance. But Verstappen found himself up against often superior cars and often not even the second or third best car. So when you talk about is he entering the all-time greats argument in Formula One, I think that argument is over now. He's a 4-time world champion. He's done it in a series of conditions. I think these 4 titles are better. Forget about the legitimacy. I'm parking the 2021 stuff. Don't worry, still mad. But from a performance point of view and what he had to do to get it, it's at least equal to Vettel. I would say more. Right, I finished. And I'm still going to get hate from Verstappen fans even after all that.
2 things. If you play this season over 10 times, I think this is the second worst it could have gone for Verstappen. I think a worse situation would have been a couple of mechanical DNFs or some bad luck or something like that.
Yeah.
Yet he still managed to win a world championship, right? The best outcome is Christian Horner doesn't send, these texts, Adrian Newey stays, all that kind of stuff. He dominates again. We won't go into that. Now, in terms of this weekend, he joins Vettel, he joins Prost, Fangio, Hamilton, Schumacher. He's one of the greats. We knew he was going to be one of the greats when he jumped into the sport.
Yeah, but I didn't want to be too previous about it. That's he's
true.
Quite good and picks up a couple of titles. That was way too early to start having that conversation. I stick by it.
But back to your point now, and staying on topic. So we talk about Norris versus Max in terms of this World Drivers' Championship. You said Norris may never have another shot. Who says Max is going to have another shot? Now, I'm not saying he isn't. Max could finish his career as a 15-time drivers world champion at this rate. He's pretty good. But I'm saying next year the car could be bad. He could have an Alonso career where he just keeps going to bad teams. Or maybe that was Alonso alienating every team he was at. Could have been a little bit of both. Now, that's not to say that Max, like I said, I'm just clarifying, he can win more world championships. It's whether the car allows him to. Now, the funny part about this, I don't want to say funny, a bit weird, is that post-race, in 2021, he told Red Bull, can we do this again, like 1,500 more years together or whatever he said? He said something like that. Can we do this forever again? They asked him about his future post-race, and he kind of gave a very, very obvious no comment. And I don't want to look into it too much, but he just didn't commit to Red Bull in the future. He didn't say, I love this team. This is the best. I want to keep doing this. This is more, Max, this is great and I'm enjoying this moment. But in my head, he's probably thinking Mercedes 2026 or maybe Ferrari after Hamilton leaves or something like that.
What my wife is like during our, anniversary dinners and stuff. She's like, well, this is a nice dinner. Let's we'll see how it goes. It's gone okay so far. But I think Jono is right to look to these comments. I don't think that you can read enough into them. So Vettel, after his 4th world championship, was really urging everybody to say, really enjoy this, soak this in, because who knows what's going to happen, i.e., we've got that Renault tractor engine for 2014, and then he's off. But this is how F1 works, because right now, Verstappen and Red Bull look untouchable, but it flip-flops and it swings around. But I will just say that, yes, the car is really, really important, but he was often the 3rd or 4th best car, and having to get the championship done and have the championship fight when, say, at Brazil, they probably did have the 4th best car overall on performance. Maybe Mercedes in the dry were a little bit worse for them. But when the conditions swung into Verstappen's window of skill, that's the difference between world champion and not world champion. And him overtaking that Alpine into turn 1, whilst Lando Norris in the background is locking up his brakes and going off. That's the difference. He hasn't had a car to just breeze away. So he's still dangerous, even if he's got the 2nd best car next season and there's other teams popping up and doing wins. If it's a mixed up season like this season, Verstappen is going to be dangerous in any of the top 4 places of best car.
The thing that gets me is that the saying is you win the championship on your worst days. And by that measure, it is very clear that right now Max is the best driver on the grid. He could have probably won in a McLaren, might have even won in a Ferrari. Not a Mercedes.
That's a stretch.
Wait a second, Matt.
No, but the first one you said. The first one.
Yeah. And so you're, and I think he's right to hedge his future because there's been a lot of change at Red Bull. They're clearly not the best car all the time now. They were very not the best car for a big chunk of the summer. And they're having to make more and more compromises as the cost cap catches up with them. So
rear wing.
I think, yeah, we'll talk about that. I think he's going to take a very serious look around the grid, pick out who's got the best car for the next regulation set. And he's Max Verstappen. He's going to write his own ticket to that team when he feels it's time to go. And who can blame him for that? That's exactly what you do in that position. And that's how you win 6, 7, or who knows, maybe even 8 world championships.
Can you just divert quickly to that rear wing?
Yeah. Okay. So this is fun.
Yeah, go on.
As a cost-saving measure, the last 2 seasons, Red Bull hasn't designed a Monza-specific super low downforce wing because they haven't needed to.
Oh.
And when they got to Vegas, because, I mean, and they do the calculations, how many races do we need this rear wing for? 2. Okay, yeah, well, whatever. We'll muddle through there. So when they get here, everybody else had one, and it made a huge difference. Now, what they've been doing is tuning the amount of drag with the beam wing. But what they basically did was someone just drew up a template, sent it to Vegas. They laid it out on the low downforce rear wing, and they got essentially the angle grinder out. The carbon fiber angle grinder.
So
I don't know
fun.
the actual name of that tool, but I so desperately want one, even though I have no use for it. And by hand, they just carved it down into like a matchstick.
That was the rational, educated, smart, exactly reality that what happened, just explained by Matt. Here's the fun, silly, not what happened, Jono speculation part of what happened. And the fact that the Formula One budget cap for this year is, I think from memory, $135 million. It's the same for 2025 next year as well. I think it was the same last year. Anyway, doesn't matter. Red Bull used to spend 3 times that amount, 4 times that amount. That's what Mercedes used to spend. I'm pretty sure. I don't have the exact numbers up in front of me. So why would you need to get in this Constructors' Championship first or second and an extra $20 million of prize money or 30, 40 million, whatever it is? Why not tank and bring a bad rear wing? You've got the Drivers' Championship all sewn up and finish third and get more wind tunnel time for next year, because how much time you get to spend in the wind tunnel is determinant on where you finish in the Constructors' Championship. That is in my dreams, what's exactly happened.
All right, well, let's have a little bit of a look at the Constructor standings then, because Red Bull, yeah, they could still accidentally come second. I don't think they can accidentally win the championship, the Constructors' Championship. They're technically still in it. But if we go to these next 2 races and they just somehow mysteriously don't get a single point or drive suspiciously behind Ferrari and, no, we can't overtake for sure, then there'll be a legitimate case for tanking, I think. But it takes skill on the ground to take to look at that rear wing and go, well, I reckon if we just scooped out, a couple of inches, what's the worst that could happen? Let's just go for it. But I suppose it doesn't affect any of the aero down the car. You wouldn't want to start hacking bits out of the front wing, for example. But something about the story is just slightly fishy, because it's like, well, they seemed like they were taking such an emergency action. Why would, if you had to start hacking bits out of a wing, would you not start trying to make the modifications back home? Why did it seem like a surprise? Why couldn't you do it between FP1 and FP2? So I'm reserving judgment. I don't quite buy the story, because Helmut Marko's original thing was, we forgot to bring the rear wing for this track. True. I still think there's a non-zero chance that they forgot something or packed the wrong one. I'm still smarting. I know we're going back to was this more rear wing thing?
No. I was going to go back to
that's
where
I was going.
Well.
Yeah,
go for it. No. So what I was saying was, Max has now won a world championship in this tight battle against Lando Norris, against all these teams in a very tight cost cap era. What is the need for Sergio Perez anymore? The whole point he was hired to the team was to support Max Verstappen to a title. Now Max has done it without his support. So there's no need for Sergio Perez, I think, as his second driver now. You might as well go all out and get another good talent, because nobody's beating Max on this grid at the moment. He's the best of this generation, as was Hamilton in his generation, as was Michael Schumacher, as was Fangio and all the rest.
I think it is with Hamilton in his form that he's in at the moment. Alonso, we can't get any real gauge of his form. I would put Alonso up there in his prime. Hamilton, with the struggles he's having at the moment, and Norris having essentially, he's lost a winnable championship I think Norris and McLaren have to be honest. That was a winnable driver's title. I think it was.
But Spanners, the car was it wasn't as dominant as it was during that middle part of the season.
It shouldn't have to be that dominant. It shouldn't have to be. It shouldn't have to be dominant. Verstappen's been outscoring Norris without a dominant car.
Very good point. I'm going to shut up now.
the argument here is it's Norris, but it's also very much McLaren making just tiny mistakes, putting him out at the wrong time in qualifying. So he doesn't start on the first or second row, but is on the fifth row. When they had that, when their car was far superior to the Red Bull. And they didn't start out by putting their thumb on the scale for Norris all the way through and telling Piastri, look, we think we have a shot with this car. We're going to need you to support Norris. We will pay you back. We promise. And none of that got done. And as a result, when it started to look close, they weren't really in a position to pull it off. And I think they kind of knew it. They already knew they'd blown it by the time they got to Hungary. And they were just trying to put some lipstick on that particular animal and make it look good, if you know what I mean.
There was a listener who I've forgotten the name, but we did a whole show on it where we forgave the Ferrari 2017-2018 car. We put in it the best possible driver and the best possible tactics, and we had Ferrari nicking both those titles.
Oh yeah, 2017
I remember that and 2018.
Yeah.
We'll do that. We'll do that for this season as well, because the list is really long. It's not just the mistakes or the performances as well. It's when they've gone wheel to wheel. Verstappen's won. He's won all those clashes. He won Austria. He won Kota. Even when he got a penalty, he was able to hold it. He won all the head-to-heads. He completely won the fight.
Which is a very good point that you brought up, and thank you for bringing that up, because Max hasn't had the Lewis Hamilton-esque 2011 season where Lewis Hamilton learned a lesson not to turn into Felipe Massa anymore and learned, he just had 100 million accidents. And so that kind of humbled Hamilton in a bit. Then he had a wicked 2012 season. Lewis Hamilton arguably could have won that title had the car been reliable. Yeah. Anyway, but Max has won this title, yet still had the same questionable tactics he had against Lewis Hamilton in 2021. He did the same thing against Norris. And yet nobody is stopping him from doing this. The rules, despite all the penalties, it's going to happen again in another title fight. Yep. So that's my only concern now for Max is I think he's a 4-time world champion. He's great. But what happens when he's in a title fight potentially next year where he's now 20 points down with 3 races to go? He can't be turning into people hoping for an accident because he's going to lose points if there's a car accident.
He was in position with Hamilton as well, where he'd got the jump and he got ahead. So, yeah, that's all fine. That's all hypothetical. But, in this situation, they just hands down. He beat Norris and Red Bull beat McLaren. I think we could probably... I think I could make the case, and I'm going to try, that we could forgive the mistakes and give that car the best possible chance of a title shot. And I think it's a winnable driver's title, but I'm happy to have that fight another time. So you mentioned there's no need for Perez anymore. So I was going to go down, Matt, I think to what I was calling the race to the bottom. So there's the competition for this second Red Bull seat is really between Perez and Colapinto at the moment. That seems to be the rumours. So Uncle Joe said to us that Red Bull's initial plan is to sign Colapinto and that Colapinto will be bringing some money in. That's the intention. Then we heard a whisper from a whisper from a whisper that crash in qualifying has put Colapinto out of the running for the Red Bull seat. And then also, I cannot remember where I've read this or heard it, and maybe it was a random Reddit post, was that Perez's team has upped the amount of money they're willing to provide for Red Bull. So firstly, the big surprise out of all of this season is really that dawning realization that Red Bull sell that second seat. Yeah, it's a one-driver team. This is why you shouldn't take the seat for the second Red Bull seat, because it's a pay driver position, or it's a pay-in driver position. I know we're having that argument about what is technically constitutes a pay driver, but you need to bring money to be the second Red Bull driver. You're not going there to beat Verstappen. So if I was a fan of a driver, I'm not sure I want them there. And then I read somewhere on the internet that even Lawson and Tsunoda, if they would be to be promoted, they're expected to bring money in, but Perez is more attractive because he brings more. So firstly, that's a strange situation for a top team to be in. But both Colapinto and Perez just made the case for not being that second driver this weekend. So let's start with Colapinto, because I've been on the Colapinto train, but what have we said that all rookies need to do? Stay out of the wall, because your reputation will take a knock way quicker by hitting walls like De Vries did, Sargent, Mazepin, Schumacher. That damages your reputation way more than, the odd good performance or slightly outdoing your teammate. And Colapinto has now had 3 crashes in 3 races, and he no longer looks like the prettiest cow at the cow market. Those good, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think if you're looking at his absolute raw performance versus Albon, and the thing to understand is Red Bull know Albon as a driver pretty well, then, well, I remember Max putting it in the fence at Monaco in the Red Bull after he'd been promoted. He's like, the Toro Rosso wouldn't do that.
That's because it turned too much.
It turned too much. Yeah, it's too much grip, right?
Yeah, we've heard this before. Of the corner. Oh, and Colapinto hit the inside of the corner this weekend.
Exactly. So it was in a car that has shown itself to be extremely difficult to drive, even by Albon. He made a tiny mistake in Q3 where Albon was not. But what works against him was how large the resulting damage was. So it's what you would call optical. I think the interesting thing here is very clear. Red Bull want that second seat to serve that Latin American, South American market. And so the only drivers they're looking at come from that area, and they're going to have to bring a nice suitcase full of simoleons to get into it. So I don't think Colapinto put himself out of the running unless he can't come up with more cash than Perez.
Interesting point. I didn't hear about the South American part. That's the first time I've heard about that.
Well, I'm looking at it from a marketing point of view.
Yeah.
I've heard this also.
Not saying you're wrong. That's just like that changes what I was about to say, because I thought at the moment Red Bull need to go for a veteran. I think that's the best thing to do. Maybe I'm wrong, or at least a consistent driver. Like, who on this grid do you really want? That's the other thing as well. Is like, if you're going to replace Sergio Perez, yeah, but you wouldn't go. Well, that's true. I was looking at the list, Matt, and I think Sainz would be the best choice. But then I was also thinking, I don't think Sainz wants that Grim Reaper seat. Like, that's a career ender to go over there, and I don't think he's ready for that at the moment. I think he'd rather go to Williams and race with Albon, and that's the best way to do it.
Wrong.
Try to break Hulkenberg out of his contract.
I'm going to argue with you. I think Sainz thought he could go to Red Bull and challenge Verstappen. That's what I think he thought. But I think that is not a thing that happens. So
do you really think anyone is? And now, no. I'm not pumping up Max Verstappen too much, but like the guy is the greatest driver the sport's ever seen.
Okay, you careful.
What I'm trying to say here is
the greats. That's enough.
There's no. I'm saying in terms of, let me explain this clearly, is that it's 2024. There's going to be somebody better than Max in 10, 15 years. But in terms of greats of all time, there is no single great. Like Schumacher, Hamilton, Fangio, all these guys, they're all in tier 1, right? Is what I'm trying to say. But I think Max, the guy has put in, not just his 10,000 hours, he's put in 30,000 hours. How could you do that 30 years ago without sim racing, without all these tools and equipment that you have in the modern day? And that's why we haven't seen a talent like this. So one thing is, and the reason I say that is I reckon Red Bull, and it's looking very likely, they might be running with one car, because who would want to even drive that second seat? Can you get a 3-car team at Williams and just say, Red Bull, we'll just give our second car to Williams. Just put your livery on it. Nobody wants to drive for us and lose to Max.
So I think Perez generates money. So there's that. So apparently he's got this whole merch line coming out next season, which is what made me think that he's probably the favorite, the runaway favorite to be at Red Bull as well. So, he generates money. So if he's generating 10 million and they will say, okay, well, we'll up our bid to keep him there then, so we can keep the rest of our profits. There's probably all that sort of business reason. It's sad enough when there's seats that are fully filled by being paid for. But when it's at a top team, I find that, even worse. But I've always said, have your clear number one driver, and the second driver is there to support and pick up points or whatever you want them to do. But I would always have a clear number one. So I'm not arguing with that. But I think there's more seats on the grid that drivers bring money in for than people realize. And people were even arguing with me that Logan Sargent is the obvious example of a paid driver we've had in recent F1 history. People will swear till they're blue in the face that he wasn't a paid driver, but the reason why there's this mismatch in what people think is it's hidden. So a lot of these drivers now will have a personal sponsor, which is a company. So one team, the funding for the seat came from a marketing firm. And then that marketing firm's biggest customer just happened to be the driver's dad. And so they fund things in these ways so that they don't get the paid driver label and tag. But Perez also hasn't covered himself in glory this weekend. Yet another Q1 exit. And the quote from Perez was, "I've forgotten how to drive." That was a direct quote from Sergio Perez. And, well, I'm getting to the point I believe him now.
But he did have that overtake. That was a nice double overtake.
That was a nice double overtake. Yeah. Against who? Against what? Against a Ferrari and a Red Bull, was it? Was that smashing down the inside of Norris?
Haas and
his teammate, basically, in Lawson. It was Lawson.
Yeah.
So he did a double overtake on a car that's pretty much ordered to get out of his way, and a Williams. So I'm going to take the shine off that a bit. So, when he says, "I've forgotten how to drive," I kind of believe him. But I think that's the situation at Red Bull. I don't think it really matters what result Perez gets.
Yeah, if they don't care about the constructors at all, and Max is a one-person team, he pretty much is, then, you are in a position where you can just sell that seat to the highest bidder.
And just before we move on, can we credit Formula One for... Max has won the title. He's not on the podium for still giving him an opportunity to have a podium and speak, because the last time we saw this was 2018, Lewis Hamilton in Mexico. Before that, I'm pretty sure it was probably Jenson Button, 2009. Like, it doesn't happen often. So credit to Formula One, gave Max his opportunity to shine.
No, and you're right. The one that always sticks in my head is Brazil 2008, where obviously it was the home race for Felipe Massa, so he was going to get most of the attention. But Hamilton got pretty rough treatment in that post-race part of it. He was getting obviously a lot of boos. You can understand that a little, but the podium was the emotional Felipe Massa on the top step, beating his chest, having the crowd roar at him, and the champions getting booed and ushered off in a corner with very little attention. So that is a good move from Formula One. Do the podium first and then give some attention to the champion at that point. Because I think in the past they'd argue, well, you're not crowned champion until the FIA gala or whatever, but no one cares about that.
Honestly, they could have had a flyover, parachuted in a rock band, and had him sprayed with champagne before the rest of the drivers got to the podium.
That's true. Right. Is there any race topics left on your list, Matt, before we go to the podium?
Just again, did we mention the fact that Ocon drove through a pit lane with nobody in it?
Don't steal my missed Apex award.
Did we mention that Stroll did the same thing? What was going on with the teams tonight? So that for me was a biggie.
Well, I think I can solve this one, because didn't Colapinto say in practice sessions that the smell of weed was so strong that they could smell it when they were driving? And
that's not good.
And he thinks they would all fail a dope test if they had one. Could that have been going up? And then Ferrari, being told to wake up by their driver, I think they could have been snacking.
They could have been. Where did my... there we go. Yes, we talked about this, but there is a real battle to pay attention. There is some very exciting stuff going on.
What was left? I knew there was something. Yeah, what's left to fight
and for? With today's finish, Haas is now 1 point ahead of Alpine for 6th place. And RB are only 3 back of Alpine. So you've got 3 teams 4 points apart from each other in the midfield.
And last race at Brazil, we kind of said Alpine had no business being in the top 5, top 10. Like that, they just out of nowhere produced a thrilling race. And now have had a double DNF. No, not double DNF. Sorry, Ocon's. Well, it felt like he DNF'd. He was that far back down the order after the pit stop.
Yeah, sorry, Esteban. 20 seconds. They just told their own driver, "We're going to give you a drive-through penalty for no reason."
But it comes back to my comment on the race review a couple of weeks ago, which was Williams needed some crucial points, and they didn't get it at Brazil. Alpine managed to do it. They've gone from a race where they've sprung something out of nothing, and now they cannot afford to have what they've had today. They had Gasly starting on the front 2 rows. They came out with 0 points. Yeah. Unacceptable. Yes, it's down to luck. Yes, the power unit let go, but it's a sad time for that team because they need the money in terms, if they're trying to sell that team, the money is very important to make it more appealing.
It really is. And that's the thing with the Ocon thing. You look at it and you're like 20 seconds up the road, man, there was a point or 2 in it. He started 11th. There should have been points for them with that car, and they just tossed it out the window.
And Brazil, you look at that and you go, well, it's the conditions. But Gasly, that wasn't a fluke putting it P3. Obviously, probably got the best of an evolving track, but that's brilliant. And so he was always going to go backwards from there, but there was definitely points on. And then the first thing I thought when that engine power unit go, because we've not always had the best impression of Renault in the hybrid era, but suddenly that decision to get Mercedes engines, you go, it's looking like a pretty good decision. All right, I get it now. Fine.
Yeah, it just it's bad luck. It's bad luck for the team. It's bad for Gasly, but really 7th, 8th was the best they were going to do. Looking at where he'd driven backwards to by the time the engine let go.
Which, one last thing, if this Cadillac rumor is true that GM are coming into, they may take over that Renault program. So all those employees, congratulations, they'll have jobs hopefully for the future. But that will be for the rumor mill for the news show on Missed Apex later in the week. Tune in.
Yeah, we'll drop in for some midweek content. Before we go to the podium, I want to urge you to come and follow us. Let's start with me. We always start with those guys. I'm the best one. You should start with me. So in the show notes below after the show, you should see links to our social media. I'm still very active on Twitter and Blue Sky, so I'm just doing both. So we'll have links there. I'm spanners ready on both of those. See my attempts at being an Instagram person. So I'm at least figuring out how Instagram works, but I'd love to have your company over on Instagram as well. We have decided to withdraw from Facebook. I'm removing the Spanners account from there as well. So if you're in the Missed Apex Facebook group, there is a link to a new unaffiliated fan account, so that the people who've chatted in there will have somewhere else to go. But personally, there's just too many social medias to manage well. But my favorite forum is, of course, the Patreon Discord. So if you fancy going and supporting us, $5 a month, try it out. That is the only reason we are able to be here and forfeit other work and make this part of our freelance gig, is because of the Patreon support. So if you consider going to patreon.com/missedapex, there's only one tier really, but we have 3 perks, which is an ad-free RSS feed that you can paste into your podcast player. And then also we do a little bit of extra fun content, and you'll be in our patron chat, which is a great place to hang out in our Discord. Let's move on to the podium. Success for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And I would say hats off to all the organizers there, because they went in there. I think now you look at the other street circuits and go, what is going wrong with the other street circuits? How can we make sure we don't fall foul of that? You've got a big long straight, you've got interesting turns that you could place into a circuit and wouldn't look out of place. It doesn't seem to suffer from that same Mickey Mouse thing that other street circuits do. It's not a Singapore 90-degree follow fest. And I think one of the biggest factors here that says this is a good street track and an overall good circuit is that when graining came into play, they weren't able to just park the bus. They weren't able to ride out the graining phase. They had to go and change tyres that had plenty of wear on them, because this was a track that you can go and race on and you can go and overtake on. So that to me makes it a success. The reason this race didn't pop is just the circumstance of they didn't quite have a situation where a faster car could overtake for the lead, but there was plenty of racing. And I just think, hats off. It's a real success. I'm more than happy to say I went in with a very cynical eye, but I think the Las Vegas Grand Prix is the best street circuit in Formula One right now. We also need to, did I plug your social medias or did I just do mine?
You just did
yours.
Well,
how selfish.
Yeah, follow Jono. Right. We'll do it as we do it with the awards. So we do the bad thing award first so we can end on a positive. So I'm going to ask the panel who they think, slow down as you look for the button, missed the apex
Oh no, you missed the Apex.
Jonathan Simon, where should we find you? What are you? Have you migrated to Blue Sky?
Yes, I did. You, I don't want to say forced. You encouraged me to sign up, and I managed to get it linked to my new website as well. So my Blue Sky, I can't even remember what it is. I think it's anyway. We'll link it in the show notes. Yeah. I don't use it that much, but we'll get onto it if it succeeds. Unlike Threads.
Now, so someone just said to me, "Why on you on Threads?" I do technically have an account, but the level of interaction just never kicked off. On Blue Sky, immediately, 3,500 people moved over to follow me there, and there's actual interaction on the posts, which is why I'm enjoying it. Anyway, so who missed the Apex for you, Jono?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, first off, actually, my website, jonathansimon.com.au. Let me plug that Spanish quickly, and of course, you can find my Instagram and Twitter. Johnny S8, JONNYESS8. Make sure you don't spell my name wrong too. Check out the website, JONATHAN.
These are awful handles. These are terrible.
.com.au.
We're just going to put links
bag out my handles.
We're just going to put the links in because no one's remembering any of that. Who missed the Apex?
You know what was funny? Spanners?
His handle missed the Apex. There you go.
You told me, Spanners, to register my full name last podcast, and it wasn't available. It was not available within 20 minutes after the podcast. Anyway, who missed the Apex? Esteban Ocon. That pit stop coming in. Lance Stroll apparently did it as well to drive through the pit lane. It was possibly, It was a turnip mistake for sure, and
he got called into the pits, right? Am I wrong about this?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And you know what? I don't want to blame Ocon himself, but I want to blame the team for that blunder. And it's not a blame game. Yeah. I'm not pointing fingers. All I'm going to actually, if I need to point fingers, it's at the situation. And that is unacceptable. I've never even done that when I was racing in the World Championship in sim racing, right? I was playing a video game. And I didn't do it. These people are at the top echelon of elite sports, and they're doing it. That missed the Apex for me 100%.
Okay, I can't make that same boast because at a missed Apex sim racing event, I got a penalty for jumping the start, had to go a stop and go, but I drove into what is an old abandoned pit lane that was just there for realism.
Oh, Road Atlanta, huh?
Road Atlanta, yeah, on the opposite side. And then when I couldn't find my pit crew, I then reversed back over the crest of the hill and got disqualified. And that was all within the first 2 laps. But there you go. So I can't make that same boast. Matt, who missed the Apex for you?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, you've taken my Ocon through the empty pit lane. It was such a sad sight. And I know they argued. They were like, oh, shouldn't he have just pulled over and waited? Wouldn't it have been quicker?
No,
and I'm like, have you ever seen it when they're not ready for the driver? How long it takes? I think it was a wash at that point. Anyway,
yeah, look at Ricardo, Monaco 2018, I think, and see how long it took them to recover.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare, that situation for the team. And I'm sure they will be looking at how that came about and making sure it doesn't happen again anytime soon. And I can't take Spanners because he's already told me what his is.
I've forgotten. Don't worry.
It's so tempting. It's so tempting to go for the Ferrari pit stop nightmare, but I'm actually going to go a slightly different way. I'm going to go with Aston because they put Alonso on the soft tire at the beginning and they took him off of it in 4 laps. And I think that was just a pretty big miss. Everybody knew the soft tire was bad, and yet somehow they put him on it. And that was almost Hamilton-esque. I'll put it to you that way.
It's such a dead tactic. I don't understand, unless they were really limited by their tire allocation. Or you felt like you had no. Then what were they doing?
They had 2 hards and a soft, just like everybody else.
So Hamilton did that a few races back, and we were saying, what on earth is the benefit? You might be slightly faster at the start, but unless you get a safety car in the first 5 laps, that's you effectively cooked and done. Seemed like such a weird tactic. And he couldn't hang on to them at all, and he didn't overtake anyone, and there was no safety car. So it did end up looking a bit silly.
Yep, no points out of it, and whatever. Maybe it worked out the way they planned, but just from a distance, seemed like a mess.
So both of mine are Williams related. With both the good and the bad. So I'll do the bad one first, which is I'm afraid it's going to go to Colapinto for cumulatively crashing. So he had the world at his feet. He was being courted by everyone. And I suspect that, just continually binning it 3 times, having your team, I think the rest of, if you're Alpine and you're the pit crew guys, you're the logistics guys, you're looking across at Williams and going, oh my God, those guys got bags under their eyes. You know, there's a guy with a cane. He's walking around on a Zimmer frame, but he's 32. And they're going, we don't want that to happen to us. And I've got a feeling that is way more damaging than the brilliant impression that he'd made up until that point. So I am worried for Colapinto. And I think just keeping it out of the wall really would have been the key thing that he could have done. All right, let's move on. Oh, Matt, we didn't plug your socials. Sorry. Quickly, blurt them out.
Easy enough. I'm at MattPT55 on any particular social network you care to search for me on.
And we've got Stuart in the live chat who said, just do the good one. We're all too sad. No, I agree. I don't want to be giving Colapinto my Missed Apex award. I'm already a massive fan, but that bud could have been extinguished before it's started. Let's hope I'm being too pessimistic. But there's a good thing award. Ha ha. Okay, so it's going to be Williams because they have had to work to get those cars on track. And especially after Brazil, it looked like it was going to be impossible. And then they did it. They got 2 cars out of there, 2 current spec cars out to Las Vegas, only to see Colapinto then crash out in Q2 and then rebuild that car again and getting it ready for the Grand Prix. So a shout out to all the Derricks at Williams for all that hard work. Matt, who hit the apex for you? And we can't say Colapinto, even though he did hit an apex.
Yeah, he quite literally hit an apex. But no, you know what? I've been watching this discussion go on, and I'd like to pick signs because like that, like it was nice of him to do such a good job. But I'm actually going to go for Lewis Hamilton. And you're going to say that's odd because he had such a tragic Saturday. But I've been watching this discussion about whether or not he's been rinsed carry on all summer long. And I'm just going to say you don't drive like that and you don't talk like that after the race if you're rinsed. So maybe he was gone, but I'm telling you now, Hamilton is back.
Jonathan Simon, who hit the apex for you?
I heard this story that Valtteri Bottas made some T-shirts that I forgot the slogan on it. I don't want to waste too much time because we're about to wrap up. But there was a slogan on it, basically just he's selling these T-shirts and he's donating the profits to people who have been sacked from their jobs unfairly because in sort of tribute to Valtteri. I have to find this slogan while we're talking. But anyway, he hit the apex for me just in the sense that I'm kind of going to miss Valtteri Bottas. A dry but very interesting personality at the same time. He's a Finn. That's just what it is, right? With the Finns. And I would hope that he signs for that second Red Bull seat.
Really? There's no way.
I want him back.
There's no way. There's no way he's got the funds for that. And in a way, it's like he's only just come out of his shell just in time for the end of his career. But, we might see him in a reserve role or I could even see him doing punditry now. You'd never have thought that 5 years ago. But now I could see him giving opinions or, he'd be welcome in the shed for some opinions, to give his expert opinion and have me just inexplicably disagree with him. He might be up for that.
I've heard he could have a go at some supercars action in Australia, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's right. His partner's Australian.
Yes. What's next? What's next is the T-shirt. That's the slogan.
Nice.
What's next?
Oh, what's next? Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was it. What's next in terms of him? So it's probably going to be supercars, as I just ruined.
Jono, he was literally yelling the slogan you were looking for at you. And
I completely forgot. Like I heard about this, like I think 2-3 days ago. I can't remember where. So, look, credit to him. I'm going to miss him. Valtteri's great. We'll have 2 more races to enjoy.
I've got one more, and it's to the people who were going up and down the escalators in Vegas, because apparently you get a fine or ticketed for standing still in the walkways, so you're not allowed to stand and just watch. And they've been really stingy with like the bridges. They block off the bridges. It was the same in Miami as well. So there's any bridge where you go, that would be a pretty good view. They have people there and they block it out so you can't see it. And when there's been a little gap or whatever in the tarpaulin, you go, this would be a really good way to watch it. And then you look at Formula E, where when you get off at the tube station for the London E-Prix, straight away, as soon as you come up the steps, you've got this great view down into the stadium and turn 4, and everyone's just like chill, like, yeah, just watch a bit of the practice session, no problem. Formula One sometimes acts as if they're doing you a favour by letting you sometimes see the cars. I dislike that. But these people were going up and down the elevator on a rotation, so that they were never technically stopping. They were just traveling up and down this escalator. If I ever go to Vegas, that's the first place I want to be. I want to watch FP1 from the escalators. Thank you very much for joining us on Missed Apex podcast. Go and follow Jonathan Simon, Matt Trumpets, and that Spanners fella. Go follow me. I'll chat to you. DMs welcome. Support us in Patreon, and also tell your friends that Missed Apex is quite a fun place to hang out after the race. As we're getting towards the end of the season, I'm actually find myself looking forward to our winter content. So we always kind of do really less newsy, but more, what do we want to do? So we've got Catman coming on, who's going to do some previous driver histories. So we're going to look into Alonso's career. I've just been chatting with Mike Caulfield, who wants to come on and talk some more strategy stuff like that. Without the timeline of the races and the news, we actually find some really fun stuff to do. And I think we're one of the few outfits that do that over the winter. So please tell your friends now that we're a good post-race show and that we're fun to hang out with over the winter as well. And until we see you next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. Okay, so it's 11 a.m. now, and I'm just awake. What do I do on a Sunday, 11 a.m. and we're done?
I don't know. What do you do when you're awake at 6 a.m. on a Sunday?
I've got to speak to my family.